In the summer of 2022, New York City's Emergency Management Department released a public service announcement on how to react in the event of a nuclear attack. The advice was straightforward: get inside, and stay tuned for governmental updates. But is surviving a nuclear attack even possible? And what if every country in the world launched nuclear rockets at the US at the same time? If you think you know how things will go down, you're about to be seriously shocked. So watch until the end. About 30 minutes before the disaster, the president's phone would begin ringing. The missile launch has been detected, and the US only has minutes to respond. The thought of one incoming call alerting us to a nuclear threat is scary enough. But imagine if the phone kept ringing, each with a new report of another incoming nuclear warhead. There are only about 4,000 nuclear warheads with an intercontinental range ready to be launched at any given time, and the US owns most of those. But there are still plenty of other threats that could come towards the US from every side. Russia has thousands of nuclear rockets capable of hitting the US. France, China, and the UK also have nukes ready to fire at a moment's notice. And Israel, Pakistan, India, and North Korea have a stockpile that can be prepped for use quickly. Because nuclear weapons are one of a government's most highly guarded secrets, it's hard to predict how many rockets could be launched toward the US and by which countries. At the White House, a mad scramble is underway to determine whether the nukes are a threat to US civilians. If they do pose an existential threat, the US can launch a counterattack, a move that would put them at war with every nuclear-wielding country on the planet. The military will also get to work immediately, deploying countermeasures. Inceptor missiles from the ground-based mid-course defense system would be launched from Alaska and California. But that move would do little to make anyone feel better. The GMD is very unreliable, and hitting an incoming nuke with a missile is like trying to hit a bullet with another bullet. Meanwhile, US citizens around the country would begin receiving announcements about an incoming nuclear threat. Certain places would be more at risk than others. New York, Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. are the most likely targets. They could easily all be hit if the countries capable of firing on us with nuclear warheads launched them all at once. So, if you were living in one of these places as a nuclear rocket was hurtling towards your home, what would you experience? When you hear of the incoming threat, it's a total shock. It just went from being a typical workday to the possible end of the world as you know it. Your mind begins to race, trying to decide if this is for real. Part of you tries to convince yourself this is just fake news. You think back to Hawaii's 20-some minutes of terror that ended up being a false alarm. You look around. Some people are screaming, running for safety, whatever that is, in terror. Others are on the phones, trying to reach their families. A nearby coworker just shrugs and sits back in their chair. If it's true, there's nothing I can do about it now, they say. You know the clock is ticking. The nuke will hit in about 15 or 20 minutes. You don't have time to drive home, you'll never make it, and being in a car is the second worst place to be, only barely better than standing outside. You scan the area from a window near your desk and spot a short, solid building nearby. It only has a few windows, and with any luck, it might have a basement. You know that's your best bet, and you need to move now. The situation everywhere across the US is devolving into chaos. Cars are abandoned in the middle of roads as drivers run toward the nearest shelter. Public transportation screeches to a halt. People who are lucky enough to be with their families gather in the safest place they can find. Everyone else is in some version of personal hell, frozen in fear, running for their lives, or spending what could be their last few moments trying to send messages to their loved ones. The truth is, no city in the US is really prepared for a nuclear attack. Most people have never even considered what they might do if a nuclear warning was issued. There is no plan for this, no orderly process. It's pandemonium. You make it to the safety of a windowless room in the concrete block building before the initial blast when the nuclear rocket hits your city. Less than a second after impact, the energy released in the form of X-rays heats the surroundings, creating a fireball of superheated air. Inside that fireball, all matter is reduced to a hot plasma, like the core of the sun. A fireball from a thermonuclear warhead on a missile can swallow up an area of more than 6,000 feet, about 550 square meters. It is so intense that it ignites fires and causes severe burns even outside that area, up to 8 miles or 13 kilometers from the blast center. As the atmosphere around the fireball becomes superheated, the surrounding air expands, pushing outward to create a shockwave that can flatten anything in its path. You're lucky enough to escape the main blast, which hits several miles away, but that doesn't mean you can leave your shelter because the radioactive fallout is just as big a threat as the fireball of impact. People who were outside and survived the blast now have about 15 minutes to get to a good shelter before the fallout begins. Radioactive debris rained down from the massive mushroom clouds ballooning above cities across the US. It will likely be at least 24 hours before you can leave your shelter safely. And once you can emerge, it will be to chaos. There is no evacuation plan in place. Roads are destroyed. Those who can flee don't know where to go. It's gridlock, but with radiation at the blast site still way higher than any human body should be exposed to, you know you want to get as far away as possible. Know anyone with a bunker? Meanwhile, the world has gone to war. The US has retaliated with nuclear weapons of its own, and they have the biggest stockpile in the world. Just nukes between the US and Russia can create at least 360 million quick deaths. And if you weren't one of the souls taken in the immediate aftermath of a nuclear assault, you might end up wishing you were, because the nuclear rockets were just the beginning of an all-out global catastrophe. Climate changes, radioactive contamination of soil and water, and societal collapse across the US and the world at large will make survival a challenge for decades. Just 2 years after even a small nuclear war, famine could be 10 times more deadly than the bomb blasts themselves. Nuclear winter will set in from the smoke produced by massive forest fires. Temperatures will dip below freezing, making any agriculture nearly impossible. Cities that were hit by a nuclear rocket will be engulfed by fire over 3 miles or 5 kilometers wide. Smoke will push soot into the stratosphere, changing our atmosphere, oceans, and land in ways scientists have only been able to guess. It's possible that the entire ozone layer will be destroyed, leaving anyone left on Earth exposed to super high ultraviolet light. Your skin will begin to burn as soon as you step into the light, making constant cover necessary for survival. Even if the US didn't respond to every country with nukes sending them our way, the entire world would still experience these after effects from such a widespread attack on the US. Global ocean temperatures would drop, changing marine ecosystems forever. Every country in the world would suffer from mass food shortages. The available food is very likely contaminated. Trade would become non-existent, and nations would hoard whatever resources they had. Even if the world decided to band together for survival, sea ice could make shipping impossible. Over 98% of the US population would die of starvation within 2 years. China, Russia, Canada, and most of Europe would also lose nearly all of their population. Would it be the end of the world? Maybe not, but close. The end of any kind of world you would want to live in. People living in rural areas would have the best chance of survival. Some countries would be far better than others. Those far away from others and which aren't involved with the nuclear war, like Australia, Iceland, and New Zealand, would experience less suffering than densely populated places. A single nuclear attack on the US would start a nuclear war with devastating consequences for the entire planet. If every country with nukes simultaneously launched them at the US, the effects would be catastrophic even without retaliation. That's the irony of nuclear weapons, of course. The initiation of nuclear war means near certain total devastation for all, especially if you nuke the country with the world's largest nuclear stockpile of weapons. So, for all of our sake, let's hope this doomsday scenario never unfolds. The US may have the largest number of nuclear weapons in the world, but China and Russia are posing a threat with their hypersonic missile technology. Can America keep up?